The fluorescent lights of the courtroom hummed, a dull oppressive sound that vibrated in my bones. Outside, the late afternoon sun was painting the city gold, but in here, it was perpetual twilight, a place where truth was negotiated, bought, and sold. My ex-husband, David, sat across the aisle, his face a mask of calm confidence. He had testified for hours, weaving a narrative so carefully constructed it felt like reinforced steel. He told the court how he had built the business, how my contributions were minimal, how the soaring profits he was claiming as solely his were a testament to his genius, his effort, his risk. Lies. Every word a calculated dagger to the heart of everything we had built together, everything I had built. He spoke of my lack of business acumen, my emotional decision-making, painting me as a mere figurehead, a pretty face attached to letterhead, easily discarded now that the real money was rolling in. His lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit, nodded approvingly, occasionally casting smirking glances my way. My own lawyer, bless her weary soul, looked like she was holding the world on her shoulders, her face etched with the strain of countering this elaborate fabrication. The air was thick with tension, with unspoken accusations, with the weight of years compressed into this single, sterile room. My hands were clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white. My stomach churned, a cold, heavy stone. This man, the man I had loved, the man I had trusted implicitly with my life, my future, my dreams, was systematically dismantling me, piece by painful piece, in front of strangers sworn to judge. He had taken our shared history, twisted it into something ugly and unrecognizable, and was using it as a weapon. He was winning. I could feel it in the way the judge watched him, in the subtle shifts of body language from the clerks, in the smug satisfaction radiating from David. He was selling a lie, and they were buying it. My throat was tight. The urge to scream, to leap across the aisle and shake the truth free of him, was almost unbearable. But I sat still, trapped by the rules of this place, the sterile formalities that demanded silence, while my life was being stolen. He finished his testimony, a final flourish of practiced sincerity, stepping down with a confident stride. He paused, his eyes meeting mine for just a second. There was no regret there, no hesitation. Just triumph. Cold, unadulterated triumph. He believed he had done it. He believed he had won. He didn't see the storm gathering. He didn't see the quiet figure waiting outside the courtroom doors. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know, truly. Before the sterile hum of the courtroom, before the acid taste of betrayal became my daily bread, there was just life. Simple, chaotic, full of the kind of hope you only have when you're too naive to know better. I had a dream, a clear, vibrant picture in my head of a place that didn't exist yet, a business built on connection, creativity, and a genuine desire to make things better for people. It wasn't about getting rich quick, it was about building something real, something that mattered. I poured everything I had into it, late nights hunched over laptops, ramen for dinner more often than not, draining my tiny savings account, borrowing from anyone who believed in me enough to risk it. It started small, just me in a rented corner of a co-working space, fueled by endless cups of terrible coffee and the sheer stubbornness of knowing I was on the right path. David was there, of course. We were married then, the kind of married where you finish each other's sentences and can read the other's mood just by the way they breathe. He worked a steady job, something corporate and predictable, the kind of thing that paid the bills while I chased this wild, uncertain dream. He was supportive, outwardly at least. He'd listen patiently while I rambled about marketing strategies or supplier issues. He'd offer quiet encouragement, tell me I was brilliant, that I could do anything. Looking back now, I wonder if he ever truly believed in me, or just the potential for what my success could bring him. It's a question that haunts the quiet hours. As the business grew, slowly at first, then with a rush that took my breath away, he became more involved. It wasn't my suggestion initially. He saw the long hours, the increasing complexity, maybe the exhaustion etched on my face, and offered to help with the back-end stuff, the finances, the administrative clutter. It made sense. He was good with numbers, organized, meticulous in a way I was not. I was the visionary, the creative force, the one connecting with clients, building the brand. He would be the backbone, the structure, keeping the wheels turning smoothly behind the scenes. It felt like a true partnership, a blending of our strengths. We were a team. My name was on the door, on the branding, on the invoices, but in our life, it was our business. Our shared future. Our retirement fund. Our everything. We found a small office space, then a bigger one. Hired our first employee, then a small team. The ramen dinners became celebratory meals at nice restaurants. The cramped apartment was traded for a house with a garden we planned to fill with flowers. Life was good. It felt earned, built together, brick by careful brick. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. He saw my vulnerabilities, my anxieties, my deepest hopes. He held my hand when I doubted myself. He celebrated with me when we landed a big client. He was my anchor in the beautiful, overwhelming storm of building a successful business from the ground up. We talked about the future constantly. Expanding, hiring more people, maybe even opening another branch in a different city. It was all we are going to do this. We will achieve that. The business wasn't just a source of income. It was the living embodiment of our partnership, a tangible symbol of our commitment to each other and to the life we were creating. I was so focused on the work, on the creative side, on nurturing the company culture, that I barely glanced at the financial reports he handled. Why would I? He was David, my husband, the man who knew me better than anyone, the one person in the world I could absolutely count on. He handled the money, the contracts, the things my brain rebelled against. I handled the vision, the people, the growth. It was a perfect division of labor, a perfect partnership. Or so I believed. The foundation of my world felt solid, built on trust and shared purpose. I was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. Little did I know, the rot had already begun unseen, eating away at the very core of what I thought was real. The man I loved was already calculating, already planning, already seeing my dream not as our shared reality, but as a resource he could eventually claim for himself. The signs were subtle at first, easily dismissed as stress or minor disagreements, tiny cracks in the foundation I was too busy building on to notice. The change didn't happen overnight. It was insidious, a slow creeping frost that settled into the corners of our life. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Little comments. My ideas became risky. My decisions were emotional, not practical. He started spending less time in the office, delegating the tasks he used to handle to junior staff, but still keeping absolute control over the finances. He said he was busy with strategic planning, working remotely, needing focused time away from the distractions of the day-to-day operation, which was me, the staff, the clients, the heart of the business. I missed him. I missed his presence, his input, even the mundane comfort of him being physically present in the space we had built together. The R in our business started to feel less like a comfortable blanket and more like a heavy cloak he was slowly pulling over his own shoulders. The first real jolt came when I needed access to a specific financial report for a meeting with a potential investor. It was something I hadn't needed before, a detailed breakdown of cash flow projections over the next 5 years. I asked David for it. He was vague, said it wasn't ready, that he was still refining the numbers. I pressed him, explaining the investor needed it urgently. He snapped. A sharp, unexpected outburst about me not trusting him, about me interfering in his area, about me needing to stay in my lane. It was the first time he had ever spoken to me like that. It wasn't the words themselves as much as the cold anger in his voice, the way his eyes narrowed. It wasn't the man I knew. The report finally arrived, days later, feeling somehow incomplete, overly complicated, designed to confuse rather than clarify. I shook it off, told myself he was stressed, that the business growth was putting pressure on him. We were navigating new territory, after all. Of course there would be bumps. But the bumps became more frequent. Disagreements over expenditures became arguments. My proposals for expansion were met with skepticism and delay tactics. He started taking more frequent business trips that seemed to yield no tangible results for the company, but always coincided with him being particularly distant or secretive. I felt a growing unease, a knot tightening in my stomach that had nothing to do with business stress and everything to do with the man I shared my life with. The intimacy between us began to wither. The finishing of sentences turned into awkward silences. The comfortable rhythm of our marriage became stilted, off-key. He was physically present less and less, emotionally even less than that. I tried talking to him, tried to understand what was happening, what was wrong. He'd brush me off, accuse me of being dramatic, of making things up. He'd say I was too focused on the business, that I had changed, that I was neglecting him. The irony was a bitter pill. He was the one who had changed, who had become distant, who was neglecting us, our marriage, and, as it turned out, the very principles the business was founded on. Then came the email. A seemingly innocuous forward from his work account, accidentally sent to my business email instead of his personal one. It wasn't meant for me. It was a communication with a lawyer. Not our family lawyer, not a business lawyer I knew, but someone completely unfamiliar. The subject line was vague, but the content was chillingly clear. It referenced asset division strategies, business valuation loopholes, and protecting sole interests in separation scenario separation. The word hit me like a physical blow. There had been no talk of separation, no indication that things were this bad. We hadn't had a serious fight in months, just this slow, painful drift into silence and distance. He was planning to leave, and he was planning to take the business with him. Or at least, the lion's share of it, by claiming it was his asset, not ours, despite my name being on everything, despite years of my blood, sweat, and tears being the fuel that drove it. My hands shook as I read the email again, then a third time, searching for any other interpretation. There was none. He wasn't just planning to end our marriage. He was planning a hostile takeover of my life's work. The man who had slept beside me for years, who knew every curve of my spine, every fear in my heart, was meticulously plotting to strip me bare. The betrayal was a physical pain, sharp and nauseating. The email was the inciting incident, the moment the facade crumbled entirely, revealing the calculating stranger hidden beneath the familiar face of my husband. The world tilted. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. The comfortable life, the shared dreams, the perfect partnership, all a carefully constructed stage for this final, brutal act of dispossession. My initial reaction wasn't anger, not yet. It was a cold, deep shock, a disbelieving horror that stole my breath. The man I loved was gone, replaced by a ghost in the machine, a predator in plain sight. The days following the email were a blur of disbelief and rising panic. I confronted David. Not with the email directly. Some instinct, some flicker of self-preservation told me not to reveal my hand just yet, but about the distance, the lack of communication, the feeling that our marriage was ending. He denied everything, of course. Accused me of being paranoid, of inventing problems, of needing therapy. He twisted my words, deflected my concerns, made me feel like I was losing my mind. This gaslighting, this insidious manipulation, was worse than the initial shock of the email. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about him trying to erase my reality, to make me doubt my own sanity. The divorce papers arrived a week later. Cold, formal, delivered by a stranger. They laid out his demands, and they were exactly as the email had suggested, only bolder, more audacious. He claimed the business was primarily his asset, citing his handling of the finances, his strategic decisions, his investment of time and capital, which was largely my initial savings and reinvested profits. He offered a pittance as a settlement for me, barely enough to cover a few months of living expenses, let alone restart my life or build a new business. He was trying to leave me with nothing but the clothes on my back and the crushing weight of debt the business had accumulated during its growth phase, debt he conveniently assigned mostly to my operational oversight. Early struggles? It felt less like struggles and more like drowning. The legal system was a maze I didn't understand, filled with jargon and procedures that seemed designed to break your spirit. Finding a lawyer felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that the marriage was truly over, and this was the only path left. The lawyers were expensive, their hourly rates feeling like a physical drain on my dwindling resources. Every meeting was a reminder of the disaster my life had become. My lawyer, Sarah, was compassionate but realistic. She explained the uphill battle ahead. David had been meticulous in his planning. He had years of financial records under his control. He could manipulate the narrative because he held the data. My name was on the business. Yes, I was the founder, the public face, the creative engine. But his fingerprints were on the ledger, on the incorporation documents in ways that skewed ownership and contribution towards him. My first attempts to fight back felt feeble. We responded to his filing, detailing my contributions, providing testimonials from employees and clients who knew the business was my vision, my creation. But legal battles aren't won on emotional appeals or shared history. They are won on paper, on evidence, on numbers. And he had controlled the numbers. He argued that while I was the face, he was the brains behind the operation, the one who made it financially viable. He presented spreadsheets that minimized my financial contributions and maximized his, twisting the narrative of our shared sacrifice into a story of his sole investment. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. He was rewriting our history, turning me into a footnote in my own story. The emotional toll was immense. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My appetite vanished. I walked through my days in a fog. The bright, vibrant world I had built replaced by a gray, anxious reality. Friends tried to help, but it was difficult to explain the depth of the betrayal, the way my husband, the person I was supposed to trust most, had systematically planned to dismantle me. Some people hesitated to get involved. Others subtly suggested maybe I was exaggerating, maybe the business wasn't entirely mine, maybe I was being too emotional. The isolation was crushing. I felt like I was fighting not just for my financial future, but for my identity, for the truth of who I was and what I had built. Every legal document that arrived felt like another blow, another reminder of how calculated his actions had been. He knew where the vulnerabilities were, and he exploited every single one. My early struggles were less about legal strategy and more about survival, surviving the shock, surviving the gaslighting, surviving the feeling that I was losing everything to a stranger who wore my husband's face. The legal battle intensified, and with it, David's tactics became increasingly aggressive and underhanded. He wasn't just claiming the business was his. He was actively trying to sabotage my ability to fight. He delayed providing documentation Sarah requested, forcing us to file motions just to get basic financial records. When he did provide them, they were often incomplete, disorganized, or seemingly contradictory. His lawyer painted a picture of me as incompetent, financially irresponsible, and emotionally unstable, using carefully selected emails or out-of-context quotes to back up their claims. They argued that the business's success was despite my efforts, not because of them, and that leaving the business in my hands would be detrimental to its future and, implicitly, to the profits he wanted to secure. Rising challenges weren't just legal. They bled into every aspect of my life. The business, the one thing I fought so hard to protect, began to suffer under the weight of the divorce proceedings. Clients noticed the tension. My focus was fractured. The constant stress made it hard to be the creative, energetic leader I once was. David's lawyers even tried to contact some of our key clients, subtly implying instability at the company because of the divorce, suggesting he was the stable force who should take over. It felt like he wasn't just fighting me in court. He was trying to dismantle my reputation and the business from the inside out. The financial strain became unbearable. Legal fees piled up. David, who controlled the business accounts, though technically we were supposed to be operating under temporary court orders dividing responsibilities, made it difficult to access funds for legitimate business expenses, much less for my legal costs. It felt like he was deliberately trying to starve me out, hoping I would run out of money and be forced to concede. My savings were depleted. I took out loans. The fear of bankruptcy became a constant companion. Every envelope from Sarah's office felt heavier than the last, carrying not just legal updates, but bills that felt impossible to pay. I was isolated. Some of our mutual friends sided with him, swayed by his calm demeanor and carefully constructed narrative. Others distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the messiness of it all. The loneliness was a physical ache. I remember nights sitting alone in the house that felt too big, too empty, poring over boxes of old documents, trying to find anything, any scrap of paper that would prove how much of the business was mine, how much of its success was my doing. It felt like searching for a single grain of sand on an endless beach. He had been so careful, so meticulous in controlling the narrative and, more importantly, the paper trail. He seemed utterly convinced he would win. There was a confidence in his eyes during court appearances, a subtle smirk he couldn't quite hide. He had planned this for a long time, I realized. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision born of marital strife. This was a calculated move, timed for when the business was most profitable, most valuable. He had used our marriage, our shared dreams, my hard work, as tools to build his own future, a future that no longer included me. The rising challenges felt insurmountable. I was facing a man who knew me intimately, who knew my weaknesses, who controlled the resources, and who was utterly ruthless. It felt like I was standing at the base of a sheer cliff face, with no equipment and no hope of reaching the top. The pressure was immense, crushing. It was a test of endurance, a test of spirit, and I was beginning to fear I didn't have enough of either left. The turning point wasn't a sudden revelation from the heavens, but a quiet moment born of sheer desperation. I was sitting in Sarah's office, feeling utterly defeated. We had just received another set of heavily redacted financial documents from David's legal team, clearly designed to obscure rather than reveal. Sarah was explaining the cost of forcing further discovery, the time it would take, the low probability of finding anything truly damning given how careful David had been. She spoke about settlement options, about cutting my losses, about walking away with something, anything, rather than risking everything and potentially ending up with nothing after the legal fees were paid. The words "cutting my losses" echoed in the room. But it wasn't just losses she was talking about. It was my life, my work, my identity, my belief in trust, my future. Cutting my losses meant acknowledging his lie as truth, letting him rewrite our history, letting him take what wasn't his. It felt like signing my own death warrant, not just financially but spiritually. I looked around the sterile office, at the stacks of paper representing the wreckage of my life, and something inside me hardened. No, not like this. I couldn't. I wouldn't. It wasn't about the money anymore, or even just the business. It was about reclaiming the truth. It was about standing up to a bully who had used love as a weapon. It was about proving to myself, if no one else, that I was not the weak, emotional, incompetent woman he had portrayed me as. It was a decision forged in the crucible of despair. A cold, sharp determination settled over me, replacing the swirling chaos of fear and anxiety. I wouldn't just survive this. I would fight. And I would fight smart. I stopped seeing myself as the victim of a cruel betrayal and started seeing myself as an opponent in a war. And wars require strategy, resources, and intelligence. David thought he had the intelligence, having controlled the finances. But he underestimated mine, and he drastically underestimated the power of truth when you could actually prove it. "We need an accountant," I said to Sarah, my voice surprisingly steady. "Not just any accountant. A forensic accountant." Sarah paused, raising an eyebrow. "They're expensive," she warned. "Very. And there's no guarantee they'll find anything. David's been very careful." "I know," I replied. "But he's not perfect. No one is. He's arrogant. He thinks he's gotten away with it. And we're not looking for mistakes. We're looking for a pattern. A story told in numbers. He lied about my contributions, about his. He lied about the business's value, manipulating the books to make it look less profitable when it was soaring, all to justify paying me less in a settlement. There's a story in those numbers, Sarah. We just need someone who knows how to read it, even when he's tried to erase chapters." It was a gamble, a huge, terrifying gamble that meant plunging deeper into debt. But it felt like the only path forward that didn't involve surrendering my soul. The determination wasn't a fiery, emotional resolve. It was colder, sharper, like honed steel. The fear was still there, a low thrumming beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by this new, fierce protectiveness of the truth, of what was rightfully mine. I was done being the passive recipient of his cruelty. I was going to hunt for the truth myself. This decision marked the midpoint shift, the pivot from defense to offense. I was no longer just trying to mitigate damage. I was actively seeking the evidence that would dismantle his carefully constructed house of lies. The hunt was on. Hiring the forensic accountant, a woman named Clara, felt like my last roll of the dice. She was quiet, unassuming, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. But her fees were astronomical, adding another layer of crushing financial stress. Every hour, she billed felt like a weight on my chest. The deep dive into the business's finances was a tedious, frustrating process. David's legal team continued their stonewalling, providing documents piecemeal, forcing Clara to work through a labyrinth of paperwork designed to confuse and conceal. The deepening crisis wasn't just external anymore. It was internal, a constant battle against despair. David seemed to be escalating his pressure. He started questioning my competence, not just in court, but to mutual acquaintances, spreading rumors, trying to undermine my reputation in the industry. It felt like he was trying to make my life outside of the lawsuits so miserable that I would give up. There were days I woke up and couldn't see a way through it. The financial burden of the legal fight was immense. I was constantly juggling bills, borrowing money from anyone who would lend it, living on the edge of ruin just to keep the fight going. The business was still operating, thank God, a testament to the amazing team I had built, who mostly stayed loyal despite the turmoil. But even that felt fragile. Clara worked tirelessly, buried in spreadsheets and bank statements, cross-referencing, digging through layers of obfuscation. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. There were no dramatic movie moments of finding the smoking gun immediately. It was slow, painstaking work. Most of what she found initially were just inconsistencies, things that raised questions but weren't definitive proof of fraud. David's accounting was sophisticated, designed to look plausible on the surface while hiding the true picture. He hadn't just moved money around haphazardly. He had used legitimate-sounding expenses, complex corporate structures, and aggressive accounting techniques to minimize the appearance of profit that was attributable to my work and maximize the appearance of expenditures that were ostensibly his contribution or were siphoning funds away. I remember a call with Clara, where she sounded weary. "He's good," she admitted. "He knows exactly where the lines are, and he's danced right up to them, maybe a little over. But proving deliberate fraud, it's tough. Most of this looks like aggressive tax planning or creative accounting, which is hard to argue against definitively in a divorce court context." My heart sank. Was this it? Had I gambled everything on this last hope, only for it to reveal that he was simply a master manipulator within the bounds of technical legality? The pressure mounted. Sarah advised me again to consider settlement. David's offer, still insultingly low, was presented as the only way to avoid complete financial devastation from legal fees. My emotional reserves were depleted. I was tired, scared, and starting to doubt if the truth even mattered in a system that ran on evidence I couldn't find. The lowest point felt like hitting rock bottom. I was alone, financially crippled, facing the very real possibility of losing not only the business, but also being buried in debt. The weight of his betrayal felt heavier than ever, compounded by the feeling that he was going to get away with it. He would walk away rich, having stolen my work, my identity, and leaving me to pick up the pieces of a life he had deliberately shattered. Everything seemed lost. All the fighting, all the sacrifice, felt like it had been for nothing. The darkness felt absolute. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was staring blankly at my computer screen, unable to focus, the gray sky outside mirroring my mood. My phone rang. It was Clara. Her voice, usually calm and measured, had a tremor of excitement I hadn't heard before. "I think I've found it," she said, without preamble. My heart leaped into my throat. Found what? The pattern. It's not just aggressive accounting. It's systematic. He set up shell corporations, ostensibly for consulting or management fees, and funneled significant amounts of the business's profits through them. These corporations billed your business for services that were either grossly inflated or never actually rendered. The money then went elsewhere. Offshore accounts, investments under different names, things completely unrelated to the business or your shared life. She explained the complexity of it. It wasn't a single transaction, but a series of smaller ones, hidden within layers of legitimate-looking invoices and transfers. Each one individually might have been dismissed as a business expense, but together, over time, they painted a clear picture of deliberate, systematic siphoning of profits. And the key? She had managed to connect the shell corporations back to him, not directly, but through a series of seemingly unrelated transactions, using public records, banking logs, obtained through subpoena after months of fighting, and cross-referencing dates and amounts. It was a financial breadcrumb trail that led directly to his hand, holding the bag. And the timing? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It started subtly, maybe a year or so before the divorce papers. Then it ramped up significantly in the months leading up to him filing. He was draining the business, making its official reported profits look lower than they were, while simultaneously enriching himself personally through these hidden channels. It wasn't just hiding assets, it was deliberate fraud designed to decrease the perceived value of the business during the divorce proceedings and minimize what you would be entitled to. It wasn't just greed. It was malice. Calculated, cold-hearted malice. He wasn't just taking my business. He was actively destroying its stated value while stealing its wealth, all to ensure I got nothing. The depth of the betrayal was sickening, but beneath the nausea was a surge of something else. Vindication. Clara had found the proof. Solid, undeniable, laid out in numbers that didn't lie. This wasn't just aggressive accounting, it was criminal fraud. The fear didn't vanish entirely, but it was suddenly dwarfed by a fierce, burning determination. This wasn't going to be a fight for survival anymore. This was going to be a fight for justice. David had played a dirty game, thinking he was untouchable because he controlled the numbers. But he had forgotten one crucial thing. Numbers leave a trail. And Clara knew how to follow it. We spent days going over Clara's findings, building the case. Sarah was quiet, meticulous, her earlier weariness replaced by a sharp focus. She understood the gravity of what Clara had uncovered. This wasn't just about asset division anymore. This was about fraud, about perjury, given his testimony about the business's value and his contributions, potentially about criminal charges. The strategy shifted entirely. We wouldn't just counter his claims. We would expose his lies, systematically, undeniably. We would present Clara's findings in court, laying bare the intricate web of deceit he had woven. The plan was set. The truth, armed with irrefutable evidence, was going to walk into that courtroom and demand its due. The feeling wasn't triumph yet, but it was close. It was the quiet confidence of knowing you held the winning hand, waiting for the perfect moment to lay it down. The turning point had arrived. The hunter had become the hunted, and David had no idea he was walking into a trap of his own making. The courtroom air conditioning felt like ice on my skin. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter, harsher, illuminating the tension in the room. David was finishing his cross-examination, smug, deflecting Sarah's questions with practiced ease, repeating the same lies he had told during his direct testimony. His lawyer watched him with that proprietary smirk, confident their narrative had held. David stepped down, nodded towards his lawyer, and glanced briefly my way. That same look of triumph was in his eyes, a silent message that he had won. He sat down at the table, leaning back, arms crossed, the picture of calm assurance. He probably expected Sarah to call a few minor witnesses, perhaps some character references or employees who would offer vague support for my role in the business. He was prepared to counter those, to minimize their importance. He wasn't prepared for Clara. Sarah called her name. The petitioner calls Ms. Clara Vance. David's eyebrows furrowed slightly. He knew I had hired an accountant, but he seemed to dismiss the threat, confident his complex financial maneuvers were impenetrable. Clara walked to the stand, a stack of binders and a laptop with her. She looked unassuming, like a librarian or a schoolteacher. Nothing about her appearance suggested the financial demolition she was about to unleash.
She was sworn in.
Sarah began her questioning, starting simply, establishing Clara's credentials as a forensic accountant, her experience, her process. David shifted in his seat, impatience flickering across his face. This was boring. This was irrelevant. This was just me wasting time before the inevitable settlement negotiation where he would graciously allow me to walk away with scraps. Then Sarah got to the heart of it. Ms. Vance, in your analysis of the business's financials, did you identify any irregularities? Clara's voice was calm, clear, projecting through the quiet courtroom.
Yes.
A significant number of irregularities. She didn't use jargon. She spoke in plain English, explaining the basic function of the business, the flow of income. Then she introduced the shell corporations. She projected charts and diagrams onto screens in the courtroom, simple visuals that illustrated complex transactions. She showed the invoices from these phantom companies to my business, astronomical sums for vague consulting services or management fees. She showed the money leaving my business's accounts and flowing into the accounts of these shells. David was no longer leaning back. He sat bolt upright, his eyes fixed on the screen, that confident mask beginning to crack. Clara then connected the dots. She presented the evidence, linking the shell corporations to accounts and investments held or controlled by David. Bank records, transfer confirmations, incorporation documents showing his associates, or even nominees, as principals, all cross-referenced with dates and amounts that matched the money leaving my business. This pattern of transactions, Clara stated, her voice devoid of emotion, indicates a systematic diversion of profits from the business, disguised as legitimate expenses. She showed how this diversion of funds directly impacted the reported profitability of the business on its official books, the very books David had presented to the court as proof of the business's lower value and my alleged mismanagement. She laid bare the two sets of books, the real one hidden within the complex transfers and the manipulated one presented for the divorce. Mr. Smith testified that the business's profits were modest in recent years, justifying a lower valuation and settlement, Sarah said, turning to the judge. Ms. Vance's analysis shows that the true profits were significantly higher. Mr. Smith wasn't managing the business poorly. He was simply stealing from it. The word hung in the air, stealing. Sarah then circled back to David's testimony. Mr. Smith testified under oath that his financial contributions were primary and that the business's profitability was due to his financial oversight. Ms. Vance, based on your forensic analysis, is that statement accurate? Clara looked directly at the judge. No, it is not. My analysis shows the business was highly profitable and that Mr. Smith's actions involved diverting those profits for his personal benefit, actions which were detrimental to the business's stated financial health and value and which obscured the true extent of its success. She went into detail, quiet, relentless. She explained how the management fees were inflated, how the consulting services were never rendered, how the timing of the largest transfers coincided with periods where he was arguing in negotiations that the business wasn't worth much. It wasn't just accounting discrepancies. It was a narrative of deliberate, calculated fraud, laid out with cold, hard numbers. David's face had gone pale. The smugness had completely vanished, replaced by a look of utter shock, then horror. He hadn't just lied. He had committed perjury. He had manipulated the financial records. And he had been caught, not by my emotional appeals or Sarah's legal arguments, but by the irrefutable evidence dug up by a quiet accountant he had underestimated. He looked completely blindsided. He had been so confident in his ability to control the numbers, to hide the trail, that he never imagined someone could piece together the scattered fragments and reveal the whole ugly picture. His lawyer was whispering urgently to him, their faces tight with panic. The judge, who had maintained a neutral expression throughout the proceedings, leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Clara, then on the projected charts, then finally settling on David. There was no overt show of emotion, but the air in the courtroom had shifted. The weight of the truth, armed with undeniable evidence, was palpable. Clara finished her testimony, calmly answering the judge's clarifying questions, pointing to specific exhibits that detailed the fraudulent transfers. Sarah rested her case, the silence in the room amplifying the impact of Clara's words. The climax wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic confession. It was this quiet, methodical dismantling of a lie, spreadsheet by spreadsheet, transaction by transaction. It was watching David's world collapse around him, not with a bang, but with the irrefutable click of numbers falling into place, revealing the fraud for all to see. He was trapped by his own greed, exposed by the very records he thought he controlled. His face was a mask of frozen terror, the picture of a man who suddenly realized he wasn't just losing a court case, he was facing the consequences of his own criminal actions. The plot twist wasn't just karma. It was a carefully executed trap, sprung with the precision of a forensic accountant who knew how to follow the scent of deceit. The victory wasn't just financial, it was the profound, cold satisfaction of seeing the truth prevail, undeniable and devastating. Leaving the courtroom felt surreal. The air outside was crisp, the sun still warm, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment I had just escaped. David and his lawyer were huddled together, their faces grim. There was no eye contact this time, no triumphant smirk from him, just the heavy silence of defeat. The judge hadn't ruled immediately, but the direction was clear. Clara's testimony was devastating. It wasn't just divorce proceedings anymore, it was evidence of significant financial fraud and perjury. The legal consequences for David would be severe, extending far beyond the division of assets. Criminal charges were likely, and the business, proven to be significantly more profitable than he had claimed, would be valued accordingly. His attempts to siphon off its wealth and claim it as solely his had backfired spectacularly. He wouldn't just lose the battle for the business, he would likely face restitution, fines, and possibly imprisonment. His carefully constructed plan to leave me with nothing had resulted in him potentially losing everything, including his freedom and reputation. The aftermath wasn't a burst of euphoric joy. It was a complex mix of emotions. Relief. Yes, a profound, bone-deep relief that the truth had come out, that I hadn't been defeated by his lies. Vindication. A cold, hard satisfaction that he had been exposed, that his cruelty had consequences. But there was also sadness. Sadness for the years wasted, for the shattered trust, for the man I thought I married who turned out to be a stranger. The betrayal left a permanent scar, a wariness that I knew would take a long time to heal. Rebuilding began immediately. With the court's findings confirming the business's true value and recognizing my primary role in its success, bolstered by employee and client testimonials, which now carried more weight given David's lack of credibility, the path forward for the business was clearer. The court ordered a fair distribution of assets, recognizing the diverted profits and assigning them back to the business's value for settlement purposes. I would retain control of the business, finally free from his insidious influence. The financial recovery wouldn't be instant. The legal fees were still immense, though a portion might be recoverable from David given the circumstances. There was damage to repair, not just financially, but in terms of reputation, both mine and the business's, from the turmoil of the lawsuit. But I wasn't starting from scratch. I had the business, my team, and the truth on my side. The experience had changed me. I was no longer the naive woman who blindly trusted. I was stronger, more resilient, more clear-eyed about human nature, its capacity for both great love and profound betrayal. I learned the importance of vigilance, of understanding the numbers, of not delegating absolute control, even to those you trust most. The wound of his betrayal was deep, but surviving the fight and winning it on terms of undeniable truth had also been incredibly empowering. I hadn't just fought for my business. I had fought for my dignity, for my right to my own story. And I had won. The victory felt less like triumph and more like standing on solid ground after a long, brutal storm. The sun was out, the air was clear, and though the landscape was scarred, it was my landscape, and I could finally begin to heal and rebuild it, piece by careful piece. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe. It helps bring more of these stories to life. Thanks for being here.